Good morning. As you are coming in, if you will just feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, and then we will get started in just about 2 minutes. Okay, and as you're coming in, if you would kindly mute yourselves so that it will be less distracting, and I will be able to share my screen. I appreciate all of you joining us today. And for those of you that are just joining us, if you would please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, tell us where you're from, what role you play. And like I said, we're going to make sure that everyone is muted. There we go. And we are just about to start. Okay, it is 12 o'clock. Thank you for joining us today. I am going to get us started here. And there we go. Are you, Susan, able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome to the second of 7 Tech Tool Tuesdays. Today's session will cover some of the basics of Google Jamboard. And again, as you are joining in, thank you for introducing yourself in the chat box. And my name is Karen Leonard. I am the Director of Education Technology and Computer Science at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. I am just starting my second year in this role. Prior to working at the State Department, I have taught in Ohio, Georgia, and Oklahoma. I've taught self-contained elementary, gifted K-8, ELA grades 4-8, social studies 6th grade, technology K-8, computer science K-5, and I was an academic technology specialist for several years. And in that role, I was able to lead out a one-to-one program and implemented a learning management system. And all of these roles have helped me just be able to share my love for technology with teachers. I'd like to introduce my moderator today. Susan Kirk is the Director of Elementary Mathematics at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and she will be monitoring the chat box during this session. She will be answering some questions, and any questions she's unable to answer through the chat box, she will share with me at times throughout the presentation, or we will have a question and answer session at the end. After spending numerous hours in video conferencing sessions such as Zoom and Google Meet, we found it works best if we start all sessions by setting session norms. Please remain muted during the session to decrease distractions for other participants. But at the same time, we'd like you to be present and participate. Please feel free to place any questions you have in the Zoom chat box, and Susan will help keep up with the questions and comments. And then, as I said, there'll be a question and answer session at the end, and you will be able to unmute and ask any additional questions you have, or to share your own personal tips and tricks with using Google Jamboard. During today's session, you will learn how to create a Google Jamboard, some of the different Google Jamboard tools, and we will share some Jamboard usage ideas. So first of all, Google Jamboard equals collaboration. Well, why should students collaborate? Well, collaboration is one of the 21st century skills that help our students be prepared for the global workforce and citizenship. The 4 C's are critical thinking, communication, creativity, and collaboration. But why is collaboration so important? Collaboration is essential in our classrooms. 50 years ago, much work was accomplished by individuals working alone, but not today. Much of all significant work is accomplished in teams, and in many cases, global teams. And that quotation was from Preparing 21st Century Students for a Global Society and was created by the National Education Association. ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, works hard to help students become prepared to thrive in a constantly evolving technological landscape. Oklahoma adopted the 216 version of the ISTE Students for Standards. These K-12 standards consist of 7 strands of standards, which we hope teachers will integrate in their daily lessons. 2 of the 7 strands directly address collaboration. Standard 2B, students engage in positive, safe, legal, and ethical behavior when using technology, including social interactions online or when using network devices. And Standard 7B, students use collaborative technologies to work with others, including peers, experts, or community members, to examine issues and problems from multiple viewpoints. Now that we understand the need for collaboration, let's talk specifically about Google Jamboard. What is a Google Jamboard? Well, Google Jamboard is a collaborative tool that allows everyone with the link to work collaboratively. I do want to provide a clarification though. There are 2 different versions of Google Jamboard. One is an actual whiteboard that was created and developed by Google for collaboration purposes, and Google Jamboard, the web version, and that's the one we're going to be focusing on today. Let's see how Google Jamboard can help students and teachers collaborate easily and effectively. Making an interactive Google Jamboard is a simple 3-step process. You open a new Google Jamboard, insert questions and instructions, and share the Jamboard via a link or maybe through a learning management system. So first, we're going to cover the steps it takes to create a new Google Jamboard. But first and foremost, before I go on, I want to make sure that you realize that in order to use a Google Jamboard, you must have a Google account. You would also need to be using Google Jamboard when you're connected to the internet. This is not something that would be able to be used when there's no internet access available. So I'm going to go through and walk you through the steps so that you can visually see the process of creating a Google Jamboard. But this slide deck will be shared with you via email after the session. And the slide deck will contain labeled diagrams that you can use as reference when you begin creating your own Google Jamboards. First, you need to find Google Jamboard. And as with any Google tool, please make sure you're logged into your Google account first. If you have multiple Google accounts, make sure you're signed into the account that you use with your students. There are 2 ways that you can access Google Jamboard. First, you can locate the waffle in the top right corner of your Google screen, and then click on that and scroll down until you see the Google Jamboard icon. Or you can go to jamboard.google.com, and that's how I'm going to begin creating my Google Jamboard with you right now. When you click on, oops, it did not go back. Let's try that one more time. There we go. When you click on jamboard.google.com, it will take you to a repository of all your past Jamboards, the ones that you've created and the ones that have been shared with you. To create a new Jamboard, you go down to the bottom right corner of your screen and click on the orange circle with a plus sign. And there you have a new Jamboard. If you notice in the top left corner, it says Untitled. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we give our Jamboard a name. And I'm going to just call it Karen's. There we go, Jamboard. And that's it. I've created a Jamboard, and now we can go ahead and use it. So our next step is to take a pre-created Google Jamboard, and I'm going to tell you about some of the tools that are accessible and usable within your Jamboard. So teachers can create Jamboards to create instructions and interactive activities for their students, and students can use the Google Jamboard to interact with each other. If you look across the top of my screen, first I would like to let you know that each slide or page within a Jamboard is called a frame. So this icon at the top looks like multiple frames. I can see that this currently is the first frame out of one frame total. But if I use the arrow to the right, I can easily create additional frames and scroll back and forth between each frame. I can also use the down arrow under that icon and view multiple frames at one time. This will be useful for something that I show you later on. Also across the top of my Jamboard, I have a background icon. When I click on that, there are 7 choices for backgrounds for my frame. You can use dots for geometry, lined paper, a white graph, gray graph paper, plain dark blue, or black. I generally like to just keep mine kind of simple to begin with. But I want to make sure that you realize that each frame, let me change this one to a graph paper, each frame you have to set an individual background for. So you can't just set a background for one frame and expect that to go to each individual frame. So maybe this first one's a graph page, but my second one is going to be navy blue. And I can continue to go back and forth. And as I said, I can view multiples at one time. We also have a clear frame icon. And that's really important for you and the students to realize that if you click on clear frame, it will remove everything on that frame except for the background and the stickies. So when students ink or write on the frame, clicking clear frame would remove all of that text. So now I'm going to go on the left-hand side to a toolbar that's visible. And the first icon I see there is a pen. If I click on the triangle to the side, I see that I have 4 different types of pens that I can use. A pen, a marker, a highlighter, or a brush. I also have the ability to select from 6 different ink colors. Now, we know that using a pen with a mouse on a computer can be very difficult, but if you're a school where students use stylus, that makes it very easy for students to ink and annotate on top of different frames. The next tool down in that toolbar is an eraser. This eraser only erases ink, but it does not erase the stickies or anything on the background. I can go back to my pointer that allows me to move and manipulate items as I use my Jamboard. And then I have the stickies, and I love the sticky notes. I'm going to model. I just clicked on that, and I can type in to that sticky and say, hello, and press save. Now, if I press cancel, I have my sticky right there. I can click on the sticky to make it alive, as I would call it, and I have different icons around the corners. The bottom 2 icons allow me to manipulate the size of my sticky. The top left icon allows me to manipulate the location or the physical appearance of the sticky. And the top right corner has the 3 dots. And we know that whenever we're talking Google and we see 3 dots, so that means that there's other menu items for us to use. This will allow me to edit my sticky. This will allow me to duplicate my sticky or to delete my sticky. Duplicate is great if you've got multiple, if you would like multiple stickies with the same information. One thing that I found that's kind of disappointing at this point is the fact that you are unable to duplicate a sticky from one frame to another. But there is a workaround, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes as well. When I go back to a sticky, you notice I have 6 colors of choices. I can use yellow, green, blue, pink, orange, or a clear sticky. And at first I was wondering, why in the world would I want a clear sticky? But this would be a great place for me to provide instructions for my students. So kind of hangs out there in the background, but they can see that it's not actually part of a sticky. And again, that can be used and moved from place to place. One thing that you have to know, another thing to know about stickies is not only can I click in the top right corner to edit a sticky, but I can also just double click to open the sticky. And unfortunately at this time, there is no capability for you to change the font size, color, style. Google is a pretty amazing company, and they take lots of instructions. So if manipulating text inside of a sticky is something you would find useful, I will show you that if you go to the top right corner, you're able to send feedback. And that's a great way for them to make changes to different Google products. Also in the right-hand corner, I'm able to insert a picture. And I'm going to select one that I have here on my device, and I'm just going to put that in there. And again, you notice that I could upload it. I could do a Google search. I could search the internet. And just like the stickies, I have the same manipulation tools. I can enlarge it or shrink it. I can rotate it. And I have, this time, I have both duplicate and delete, but not edit. The last tool on the left-hand side toolbar is a laser tool. And that would be good if you are using this to guide students step by step through some information. And if you notice, I'm able to draw attention to something, but then the laser fades away after just a couple seconds. There's just a couple more tools that you need to know when using Jamboard. Up in the top right-hand corner, again, are the 3 dots. I can rename my Jamboard here. I can download my Jamboard as a PDF, or I can save individual frames as images.
Yeah, either place.
This is great. Oh, okay. Just make sure, please, you have everything muted. There we go. And there we go. Okay, one of the great things is I can create a Jamboard with my students and share information and download it, like I said, as a PDF. Each frame would be its own PDF page within that packet, or as individual images. And think, if students are not in the classroom at the time, or this is something that you would like them to review later, you could share either the PDF or the images via email or Google Classroom or whatever learning management system you're using. I can also just flat out remove my Jamboard, or I can make a copy of it, and that can be very useful. Sometimes I would like to create a base Jamboard and then share it with multiple groups, but I don't want to go through the entire recreation process. So I can make a copy of it and then rename it according to group. So, and I can also share my Jamboard. This is probably one of the things that I have found most confusing or troublesome, because by default, this is the share menu that appears. I need to make sure down here under Get Link, by default, Google Jamboards are shared as view only. So in order to share this and have students or other people be able to interact within it, as would be the purpose of a Jamboard, I would need to change it from viewer to editor. Then I can take that link, share it, and people are able to go back and forth and interact. And as I said, the slide deck that you will receive in the follow-up email has detailed pictures and illustrations with information on how to make sure that you share correctly and help you outline the tools within this. So I am going back to my original presentation and I'm going to catch up. Like I said, we've got our using Jamboard. And before we go on, Susan, are there any questions at this point that might need to be addressed?
Yes, can you insert live links into Jamboard?
Ooh, that's a great question. I have not attempted to do that. And my impulse would say no, because it seems to be just basic text. But if any of you are Jamboard proficient and know a way around that, please feel free to share in the chat box. Maybe you could insert a PDF image that has a link. There's always workarounds. Susan,
another question was,
okay.
Can you change the background after you start using Jamboard? Once you start posting sticky notes?
Absolutely, you can change the background at any time and it will not affect your sticky notes.
Okay, someone posted in the chat and Christine responded, can you change the thickness of the pen?
Well, and Christine's response was,
yes, by clicking on the pen?
Oh, I think just by changing the style of the pen, whether you want it to be a pencil or a highlighter or the paintbrush, that would be the only manipulation of your pen.
Okay, and just to catch everyone up, another question was, can students delete or erase others' work?
Yes, actually, that is a good lead in to some of the usage tips that I would recommend. One of the things that make many Google products wonderful is the interactive ability for, well, collaboration and editing and working together. And you do need to make sure that you establish norms with your students prior to using. So let's see. Some usage tips. As with all new tools, you may want to allow students to play with Jamboard for a few minutes prior to your first lesson. I found that even adults like to go in and click around and see what's possible. And then once that playtime is over, then you're able to establish your norms, such as no moving or editing sticky notes that belong to others, discussing appropriate content for words and images, and reminding students to not click clear the frame. Other things, if multiple steps are being involved in using a specific Jamboard, I would recommend making sure that you provide instructions for students. There's multiple ways that we found possible to do this. Again, you can use the clear background sticky to share your instructions, or if you'd like to add a little more information and maybe change the font and draw attention, you can type your instructions in a Google Doc or Google Slides and take a screenshot and then add that as an image into your Jamboard. That way students are not confused as to what's expected of them. And again, just as a reminder, only because I have done this myself, please be sure that when sharing a Google Jamboard, you do change the user settings from viewer, which is default, to editor. Some other tips. I'm going to show you some examples of color coding or numbering slides if you would like to have students work in different groups. It just helps organize, and again, the more specific you can be with your expectations and usage detailed information, the easier it is for students to navigate. There is also the ability to turn off editing rights after a certain time. So if you have had students work together to create a document and it's just perfect and you do not want anything else to change within that, you're able to go into settings and just set it so it's view only so that it remains that way for the future. I wanted to share some examples and ideas for using Google Jamboard. And here is one that I've created based upon digital citizenship. And let's make that full screen. As I said, here are examples of providing group role instructions and instructions right directly in the frame. And if I go from frame to frame, we want that to go away. If I go from frame to frame, you will notice that these instructions are on every slide. There, oh, come on. I've also numbered each individual group, and you can see that this is group 1, and it's on slide 1. So if I were to number students and say, I've got 5 groups, I can say group 1, you're working on frame 1, group 3, you're working on frame 3. And when I go up here, you can see that I have copied and pasted the instructions on each and every frame so that the instructions are visible for each group as well. I'm going to exit out of that Jamboard and go back to my presentation and some other ideas for you. Before I go on, Susan, any other questions that need answered before usage and the fun part?
Little bit. So if you clear the frame, can you restore to what you had before you cleared?
There is, just like with all of the other Google or even Word documents, the little undo arrow in the top left-hand corner. So it's not all gone, but I'd catch that quickly if so.
Okay, and can you identify which students post?
Unfortunately, there is not a way to identify which students post. So again, that would be making sure that norms are shared and expectations, and discuss you know, how you would do that with any tool that's anonymous.
Okay. So we can't see who posts. Can we ID who clears the frame?
No, it is all anonymous in that way. But if you do want students to identify their post, you could have them type their name in a sticky as well.
Okay. One last question was, is there a version history for Jamboard as there is in Google Docs?
Not at this point, but again, that's another thing that you might want to suggest to Google. I think their purpose for using this is to be able to brainstorm and probably not hold maybe formative assessment, but not summative assessment or anything that would be used to identify. It's just kind of a brainstorming tool.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Okay. Well, let me share some other ideas. I was speaking with the people in our office, and we have been using Jamboard quite a bit. And here are some usage suggestions from our curriculum and instruction team. We personally have been using Google Jamboard as a way to welcome new faculty or new staff into our department. Each person was asked to write a sticky to welcome our new employees and include their picture. And again, this is something that new employees are able to save as a PDF or download and look at later. You could do this with students as well. Many times you've already done this with Google Slides, where students introduce themselves on each individual slide, but you could assign them each a specific Jamboard frame and do the same here as well. Here is an example of a Jamboard being used as an icebreaker. Up in the top left-hand corner was the question that was posed. Have you participated in design thinking activities? And as you can see, the more stickies that are used, the more chaotic it is. But sometimes that's kind of the fun and the brainstorming. And we would be able to then, after the initial brainstorming session, go in and sort the individual stickies into yes or not yet, or again, that way you can kind of take your brainstorming and then analyze the responses. This could also be used as a warm-up for the start of the class. Maybe you were to post a picture of something related to a lesson that you're going to teach and have students come in and share what they think the lesson will be about. Here's an example of a brainstorming session where people put their individual thoughts on, again, colored stickies. And then after the 3-minute brainstorming session, people went back and were able to group similar or like ideas. We've even seen this done where once they're in groups, people go in and vote, and you can vote on your favorite by either putting check marks or X's directly on top of the stickies, or as you can see, there's even a path connecting each sticky to the next step. Other ideas. We've talked about introducing a lesson or a warm-up activity, but you could also use Jamboard as an end of the lesson activity where you pose a question, or as an exit ticket. Think about the fact that, what did you learn today? What still confuses you? What are 2 things that you learned? You could also do it at the start of a unit with a KWL or a pre-lesson context. I could set up 3 individual frames with, what do you know about this topic? What do you want to know about this topic? And then we could revisit the Jamboard after the unit and share what we learned. We could use a Jamboard as a question parking lot. If you do not have the capability to have a chat feature within a video conference session, or even within a live face-to-face session, you could have students type their questions into the question parking lot, and then have a moderator like my friend Susan, who can respond to those questions from time to time. That way, questions aren't lost, because I know that if I don't write a question down or ask a question right away, sometimes that question slips out of my mind. Here's another, this is a math use idea. I don't know if you've ever heard of graphingstories.com, but our secondary math director, Christine Kerner, has suggested this. And you can use graphing stories. What they are short videos. And they're providing the information that you can use. Students watch the video, and then they can go back into the Jamboard, and you could use the graph paper, and students can use the information from the video story to make a model of the graph and then justify their reasoning with stickies. The K-20 Center at the University of Oklahoma has some wonderful instructional strategies that they share. Here is an example of one. This is a word splash strategy. And think of maybe an upper level science activity. You could provide students with 4 to 7 vocabulary words and have those vocabulary words connect to a new topic, and have students think about the meaning of each of those words that they already know, and then on stickies, write a short summary of the content connection between those vocabulary words and a possible new topic or an old topic that's used. Another possible idea is a word building activity. This is great if you're working with younger students. Students can be given a word family or a base word, and then they can manipulate the sticky notes to create new words, which they could write down on another piece of paper, and you just pull them back. I loved this idea, and I'm thinking, oh, just to have one base or group of letters and have to duplicate all of these individual alphabet stickies would take a long time. So if I go up here and expand the frame, this is where I told you that you're able to then go to the 3 dots here. Oh no, it's coming. And there we go in just a second. Buttons. Are we back on? There we go. So now I can go to the three dots and duplicate that frame. Then I can go into frame 2 and change that sticky and save that. And there we go. Now I have a word building activity with AR and AN. And I didn't have to recreate all of the alphabet stickies. Our Open SciEd group has been working on creating units, and this is a Jamboard based upon a 7th grade Oklahoma science standard. And as you can see, this is a 20 frame Jamboard. And I just wanted to be able to show you that this is not just something that little students can use. This is effective even with high school learners and adults. And I specifically wanted to show you slide 10 is a great example of how that they have imported images. And on the left-hand side, they've given specific instructions. And if you notice, they're talking about putting a green X and a yellow X. Well, they also imported a screenshot of the pen menu so that learners or users would remember how to access the pen and how to change the colors. Another one, and this is a very detailed, there we go. This is a very detailed frame. Again, this is creating a unit for 7th grade science. The instructions are up here in the corner. They're telling you use the pointer, use a sticky, use the pen, multicolored stickies that kind of direct the user to specific areas. And again, an example of specific information imported as a picture and shared. As I mentioned before, the K-20 Center has numerous instructional strategies for teachers to use, and I love using this as a resource. And many times we think that these instructional strategies are only able to be used in face-to-face learning. We know that there's a lot of uncertainty in what our school year will look like, and you may even consider using some of these instructional strategies to engage your students even during periods of distance learning. I know that the ABC graffiti, the affinity process, and card sort are all activities that are easily used and recreated within a Google Jamboard. And again, it just is an engaging way to engage your students during instructional periods. Well, those are some of the ideas that we have come up with for using Google Jamboard with your students. I also wanted to share that we have a video tutorial database of various technology tools, some which will be covered in Technology Tool or Tech Tools Tuesdays, and some beyond. Currently, you can see the tools that are in the database, which yes, does include, oh, it does not include, trust me, Jamboard is in there. You're able to go through and sort each of these by tool, by user type, which is parents, students, teachers, and either administration or IT, and the level of the user. And you can see on the left-hand side that all of these have specific topics assigned. This is able to be accessed via the link right here. Well, that's a lot. I think Google Jamboard is a very simple tool to use. I would recommend just creating one and playing with it with maybe your friends, your coworkers, your own children, your students, just to be able to experience it. It's kind of a no-fail tool. But before we go on to the last few things, does anyone have any additional questions or comments right now?
So some of the questions were, how do students access the teacher's Jamboard?
Okay, well, if we recall, up in the top right-hand corner, there is a share icon. And when you go in there to share and change the settings to edit, you're able to copy the link. And that link can be shared with students through a learning management system such as Google Classroom, Canvas, or even through an email.
Okay. Another question, they could not find in the Google Waffle Jamboard, so how can they get it?
Actually, there are 2 blocks within that. Sometimes you have to scroll down to the second block, or I believe that there's more tools. There's a more option that will bring additional ones up. And I think it's one of those that after you use it for the first time, it should appear in your waffle area.
Okay. So can you assign a Jamboard to each student in the classroom and then give each student a new copy?
You could, yes, you could. You would just have to make sure that you share each individual link to each individual student.
Okay. And how did you draw the line for the boxes for the detailed slide?
Oh, those were created within, I believe, like a Google Doc, and then it was a screenshot and then imported as an image.
That's it.
Okay. Well, before I let you go, I wanted you to be able to have a chance to use Jamboard on your own and to share ideas. You can go through, and if you're a K-2 teacher, access one of these 2 Jamboards here, 6, 8, 9, 12, admin, arts. There's a page or a frame set up specifically for visual arts and for musical arts, world languages. You are able to go in and share your ideas and thoughts. How could you use Google Jamboard with your students? There are 2 frames or more per Jamboard. Any ideas that you share in this Jamboard will be accessible when I share the slide deck in my follow-up email. You will receive a follow-up email later today with a link to this presentation, and as I said, access to the group brainstorming Jamboard. A video of this session will be available on the Oklahoma State Department of Education's Educational Technology Professional Development website. And I will also include a link to a survey because as a presenter, I'm always looking for ways to improve my presentation skills. If there was something you think should have been added, or if you have other tools that you would like to learn about in the future, please add those on the survey and we will see what we can add. So I would like to thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you for taking the time out of your summer to continue to improve your skills. And remember that the Oklahoma State Department of Education is always here. My email address will be in the front of the slide deck so that you can email me directly with any other questions or comments that you might have. And hopefully I will see some of you next Tuesday when we learn more about Flipgrid.
So Karen, before you go, do you want to tell them quickly how they can download the chat?
Oh, great. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, because I know that a lot of information is shared within the chat, if you open the chat, you should see the opportunity. It's a little piece of paper with a folded corner and it says file, and that will allow you to download the chat if you would like to access that later. When you do that, please make sure that it is, I believe, everyone in the meeting, and then you're able to download that information. Well, again, thank you for coming today. I will be here if you have any other questions or concerns or just want to stay and ask individual questions, and enjoy the rest of your hot afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Rhonda Hicks, and